there from the Garden of Astral Delights. This is the Etherica podcast. I'm Ike Baker, and I'm joined today by my co-host,
Sky Mathis.
How you doing, man?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Pretty good, pretty good. What have we got lined up tonight? What have you up your sleeve?
Topic of tonight's going to be on freedom. This is something you came to me with, and I'm super stoked about it. I'm looking forward to it a lot, and I'm both excited and curious where it's going to go. You wanted to do an episode on kind of the methods of freedom, and I know that you have a few particular directions that you wanted to take this, so can't wait to get into it. I kind of wanted to lead up to that, though, with a couple kind of introductory statements, and because I want to first say freedom is it's something I'm extremely passionate about, and very few things kind of get me into a particular emotional state of mind more than this subject. You know, contemplating the beauty of particular examples of freedom, expressed and or exercised. It's one of those very things, freedom itself. And so I was thinking about freedom and what it is, and I have a sort of philosophical, I don't know, I guess abstraction, if I may. If I was to distill it down, if you look at freedom as a sort of simulacrum, if that is the correct word, like the core ingredients that formulate or give rise to the existence of freedom in a very literal sense, to me, it seems like it really begins with one becoming two, or it seems like freedom requires a plurality of particularly unique individuations, and that the degree of freedom is always in relation to the quantity of the individuations available of any given category, or any choice with variation, really. Or attainable options. Each option can have its own qualitative nature, and that's sort of a value judgment that we make in regards to how we engage with freedom, but it itself is a result of a unique multitude or plurality of differentiations themselves. And it could be simple, it could be simply two things in regards to a choice that we execute, like an apple or an orange, or a red apple or a green apple, up and down, left or right, 1 inches or 2 inches. Each option attainable, though. And if it's not attainable, then the freedom doesn't exist. If you have an attainable apple but no other attainable options or food, then you're not free to choose. There's no freedom of choice. And so that notion, it can kind of get us into the idea of illusions of freedom as well. But aside from that, I think that in the same way that there are nested hierarchies of truth, I think there's also perhaps nested hierarchies of freedom, in the sense that although one may not have the freedom to physically attain X, Y, or Z in a tangible form, he or she may be able to attain its conception at the very least. And so the limitless nature of freedom of thought in particular, I think, is one of our most powerful gifts to expand or build one's momentum in the pursuit of the acquisition of expanded freedom. And we can sort of touch on that, but kind of going back to my example to wrap up this thought, you could be completely void of freedom in terms of what available options you have attainable to eat. For example, you might literally only have one option, the apple alone. That's it. But with that, you would still have the freedom to eat or not to eat the apple at all. So this is what I sort of am getting at with this idea of nested hierarchy of freedom in regards to any given subject. Like on one axis, you could have a dual variable of red or green apple, and then on the other, the freedom to choose between them. But the higher order of freedom and more consequential is to eat or not eat the apple at all. The freedom to choose starvation or sustenance. So I think freedom fundamentally comes down to variation or potentiality, plus attainability, and it's intrinsically or inherently linked to choice, and which choice there's an inherent link to consequence, for better or worse, or cause and effect. It's a determination of path on the multidimensional road of causes and effects, exercised by a conscious will that gives rise to its expression for freedom to be expressed as a choice made or enacted. It exists within one power. Like you contemplate, you decide, you then utilize your will and you pursue your intended goal, you exert your effort, you execute your choice, you reach out, you grab and you eat the apple, and then the consequence is born, and it goes on and on. And so, yeah, interestingly, I find that freedom and the awareness of its existence do not necessarily go hand in hand. Freedom can totally exist, but the individual may be too unaware to even recognize it, or vice versa. He or she may starve to death based on his or her own assumption that there is no apple at all. He or she might lack or have an underdeveloped imagination, which to me is really, it's almost a sort of, like the imagination is almost like a sort of built-in freedom orientation device. And so back to what I was saying about conceptualization and imagination as a sort of seed germ that fertilizes or is fertilized by the inspirational force that drives motivations. So there's a lot that we can get into with this conversation in terms of dancing with the philosophy of freedom and its associated ideas and all of that. But for one, I really think that some people value the gnosis or realization of freedom more so than others, definitely. Others are kind of just like Plato in the cave, and they don't really know what's outside of their reality bubbles, and maybe to a lesser or more so degree are even concerned or care about that. Maybe they're just content with whatever. But I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple things in particular, and it may kind of get us off track a little bit. We could always bring it back to wherever, but like if you have any thoughts on the relationship between the imagination and freedom, as well as inspirations, like the muses and the forces that move us, some of the potential origins of an individual's motive force when it comes to choice making and action taking, the origins of motivations themselves, in your view. Perhaps instinctual motivations could even be in the mix, but I do kind of feel like imagination, it can be used to generate in some sense to like a higher degree of freedom through creative conceptualizations, at least that kind of involve like these inspirational forces. It seems like they descend into the imaginative mind field, if you could call it that, and kind of act as a sort of a wind or weather of psychic mentation that motivates. But yeah, I guess, what do you think of all that, and what are your thoughts on the relationship between freedom and the imagination itself?
Well, I think that you touched on a lot of things that that I basically had to say in your intro, which is was very well said, very well thought out. I think I'm gonna, in kind of elaborating this, I'm gonna touch on things that you just said, but I'm gonna bear them out a little more. And what I've learned is that you really have to illustrate things for people. People can hear what you have said and maybe take in 15, tops 30% of what you've just said. You, me, other people, we're not typically actively cognizant enough in any given moment to really be absorbing everything that's said. So I think that this is one of those conversations where it is worth it to sort of not merely belabor a point, but to go through with a fine-tooth comb and really draw it out for people, really exemplify what it is we're talking about, really illustrate that. And freedom is relative based on perception. That's kind of what you had said. But it's the first thing that's really striking me when talking about freedom and the imagination. Some people don't. They have this sort of atrophied imagination. I've worked with a lot of people in terms of, different esoteric curriculum or curricula and other things as well, meditative groups, energy healing, all that sort of woo-woo fun stuff. And you come across more people than I thought I would, really, who believe themselves to suffer from aphantasia, which I don't think actually exists.
What is aphantasia?
Aphantasia is the inability to visualize anything with the eye of the mind. There are some people that say, I don't even talk to myself. I don't even have an interior monologue. And it's like, so I understand that I'm limited by my perception, but in a sense, I seriously contemplate, based off of how they're able to, their behavior, in accordance with certain situational things that I, physically watched these people have to navigate before my eyes. It doesn't make sense that there wouldn't be any of that interiority. It's just there's this missing link in terms of toggling. There's this missing understanding between the interior and the outerior, the exterior, the inside and the outside. And so right there is a really, since we've kind of landed on it, that's a very interesting perceptual clue in terms of like how they process information, how they process their inner lives and the outer world. And that's really the thing with freedom. If you have lived in a cage your entire life, well, then being walked once a week is freedom, and if you let's take the other end of the spectrum. If you have lived in America for your entire life, probably post 1950, you are probably unaware of the many ways in which you are entirely a slave, completely 100% a slave. And a lot of that has to do with financial system. And I'm not going to drag this into that corner of, highly politicized. Well, what's your plan? What do you have a better idea? I've got a better idea. Sit the fuck down and listen to me. But we have relinquished all any semblance, any modicum of true temperance, of true equilibrium in our lifestyle as a people, to be able to say with any confidence that I'm in control of myself. And some people are like, right, because there's this hierarchy of desire. Well, that guy's in really good shape and I'm fat and I can't get myself to have his discipline. I can't get myself to go to the gym, so he can control himself. Not necessarily. I was on that fucking hamster wheel for many, 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 many years. I mean, I was ripped, I was, on all sorts of supplements, pre-workouts, and it was pure fucking vanity, because that's not temperance. Lifting 5 days a week, lifting 4 days, powerlifting, intense cardio, that's not balance. It's an extreme. It's like the hyper consumerism, it's been so good so long. There have been so many choices, so many options. Everything seems to be catered to us. You know, if you ever listen to any kind of marketing, it's your plan, it's your choice, we're your company. You know, it's all they're coddling you. They're vomiting this horse shit at you that it's about you. And you know, there's something on the subconscious level that really gravitates towards that kind of coddling. You know, makes us feel special. And that sounds insane, but look, you know, you're the one falling for it. So, but it's true. And people are, you know, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily just the words, right? That kind of linguistic sorcery. It's already been hardwired into us that these are the official delivery systems: television, the news, movies, production companies, famous actors, anything that at this point, like, they could say anything, but because it is coming through that filter, it has our awareness and it also has our subconscious attention. We are literally being assailed at all fronts and just allowing it to happen. You know, it's like nobody is guarding the temple. Nobody is guarding the temple of the mind. And ultimately, you want to talk about imagination? I mean, if you are completely unaware that any of this is happening, your imagination is going to if you have a complete unawareness of the definition of freedom at a higher level, you know, within a broader picture, then your imagination is going to graft itself onto self-satisfying things that pander to the undeveloped person in the undeveloped state which you are and which you are in. And so, you know, we come up with these ideas of like, you know what, you've been told if you work really hard and you think, you dream big, you can make it. And so, you know, 16-year-old me who isn't popular at school, you know, wants a girlfriend more than anything in the world, and is just constantly the butt of a joke. Well, what's cool? You know, music, you know, late 90s. Are you kidding me? I mean, and it's so funny because like that whole rock and roll aesthetic, that counterculture, it was all horse shit. It was all programming, you know, like none of it mattered. None of it was the real fucking deal because it all operated within this commercial televised milieu that was inherently self-destructive to the people that were consuming that. But at the time I make this choice and I'm like, hey, that's really fucking cool. I think that's within my reach. Fast forward, you know, 14, 15 years later, 30, 31 years old, and I am playing out this fucking fantasy based off of a decision 16-year-old me had on what was cool and what would be my life path, you know, going forward. So my imagination did some incredible things, but none of it was toward freedom. All of it was in this kind of in the same direction I had always been going in. And just because I got older and just because I got a job and just because I got a car or an apartment, so to speak, you know, like just because all those things happen doesn't mean that I became any fucking wiser. You know, my consciousness didn't really expand in 3 dimensions. It was expanding in 2. It was getting wider along a single plane. Which was, you know, blind positivistic materialism. Even if I was always a theist, which, you know, I went through my phases, but even if I was always a theist, I wasn't living that out. You know, I was caught in this fucking wash dry circle that our society has us gripped in like a vicious undertow, like a whirlpool, and it strangles the ability to make informed choices. It strangles the ability to attain that broader picture where I now know what freedom is outside of, is it Burger King or McDonald's? Is it Republican or Democrat? Is it Hyundai or Beamer? You know, like which bank do I want to go $20,000 into fucking debt with? You know, that's choice? No way. You're a fucking slave. So that's that's really imagination can only go as far as your perception can see, and our perception does not see too far. You got a lot of people out there who want to be, their engine is ambition, their dream is yes, it's financial freedom. It's not mental freedom, it's not emotional, it's not spiritual freedom. It's financial freedom. And that's why so many people get there, and they get to the top of that mountain, and for like 5 or 10 years they just wear all the fucking the $1,000 jackets and drive the Maseratis, and then they turn around, they're like, well, this was horseshit, like it's not this is not it. It didn't scratch the existential itch. So that's as far as I think. Obviously, the imagination is our most powerful tool for creating futures. But the question is, you have to stop first and say, what kind of future am I capable of creating? What am I, like, if I only have, if there's like, those big Crayola boxes you get when you're a kid, and there's like, I don't know, like, 50, 36 colors, it's batchy. If you only have 3 colors, like you were saying, my future is limited. I don't really have choice there. I have 3 choices because I can't see the full spectrum.
Yes. Amen. And yeah, I think this sort of relates. So as I was kind of mentioning the sort of wind or the weather of psychic mentation, and I'll include an additional important comment like on the note of weather, because we're talking about freedom at a particular time, and I think there's a difference between maybe like irrational paranoia and the focus of one's thoughts and attention versus a very reasonable and experiential sort of pattern recognition type situation of weather detection in terms of events and forces playing out nationally or globally, and in utilizing the knowledge of the ancient past and gnosis of the local past. If we are to trajectory map sort of the weather of consciousness, we can without a doubt see some storm clouds overhead, and it's pretty much up to us to properly address the situation for ourselves, our friends, our family, etc. Are we going to stand and get taken out by the flood that's coming, or are we going to prepare and build shelter? We have realities that are encroaching, and there are potential directions, potentialities, and probabilities that it would only be wise to address. With that being said, maybe you can sort of lay out an overview of what is some of your primary intentions, concerns, or directions you hope to take this conversation in, and I also want to just ask you, why is this subject so important to you yourself personally?
All right. First, I want to say, before I address any of that stuff, as a preface, I've said a lot of things that are controversial about the society in which we live. I'm not pro anything, so I'm pretty much anti everything in terms of like civilization and society. I have the wherewithal to understand that capitalism is just as flawed as human beings are, and that will continue to happen with every new cycle of every new invention. Every new iteration will inevitably reach a peak, which is whatever the highest we are capable of at the time, and then it will begin to degenerate, because it doesn't matter if it's communism, it doesn't matter if it's capitalism, everything's a fucking experiment until the fat lady sings. And at a certain point, right, what are we seeing? Just cycles. Some are shorter than others, some are longer than others, but we're seeing cycles, and these cycles tend to show us, like you were saying, pattern recognition. Pattern recognition was probably the most useful thing I learned in my entire early, like my young manhood, early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, learning constantly, repetitiously being able to find patterns, because we live in a universe that is patterned There's no way you can come up against that and fight that. A lot of people say, oh, well, everything's just random and everything's just chance. Absolutely not. That makes, from the standpoint of logic, that makes zero sense. Zero sense. I mean, I have an easier time believing that Santa Claus stuffs his fat ass down a chimney and brings the kids presents than believing that all this fucking pattern, all this multi-variety, the most, and the most nuanced level of subtle, repeating, geometrical relationships came out of nothing. Because the thing is, if all of this was predicated on there being nothing underlying, no substratum, that means that there would be no underlying principle to even create a Big Bang. And let's say the Big Bang, we'll take this crackpot theory and run with it. Let's say it did happen. If there was no pre-existing underlying order, consciousness, relationship, then all those atoms that were dispersed in the beginning, they would never have adhered to each other, and they would just be moving in one direction, infinitely as far in one direction. Then nothing would have cohered, nothing would have formed relationship, nothing would have been able to begin the sequence of pattern generation. So pattern recognition is really the most useful tool that you can develop as a human being. And the patterns that we're seeing is just this, right? In the occult, it's the Wheel of Fortune. It's the tarot card. The wheel of the tarot, the rota. It's just, that's all it is. The wheel of samsara. It's just, we're at the top, nowhere to go but the bottom. We're at the bottom, nowhere to go but the top. And the reasoning, the circumstances, they're all artificial. Okay? It's all artificial. Whatever happens is going to happen. Whatever needs to happen is going to take place in order that the wheel keeps turning in its, pre-established proportions and in the ratio and the speed at which it has to turn in any given situation. So that right there sounds a lot like predestination. I do believe that there is a predetermined component, a deterministic component. To ignore that is to basically pluck one of your eyes out. You've got half field of vision. You're not seeing reality. You're not seeing the whole picture. There is very clearly a heavily deterministic component. And that's also that limitation, that bounds within which we operate, we live and move and have our being. That is necessary. It's necessary. We have to have boundaries. And that's what that principle is. The principle of determinism is the principle of Binah. It's the principle of boundary. It's het, the enclosure. But, right, because everybody likes to adhere to this strict Cartesian, this or that mentality. In reality, it's both simultaneously. There's also a free will component, and they interact with each other the same way light and dark, light and shadow interact to create everything we see, and on and on that diatribe. But so I just want to make it clear right at the outset, I am not somebody who's like, we need to, start implementing social change. I don't give a tuppeny fuck about social change. I care nothing for it, because it's going to be more of the same. If you're a student of history, you should be scared if things have been good for too long, right? You should know, like, the other shoe's going to drop soon, because it always has, and it always will. It always will, no matter what. No matter how technologically advanced we get, no matter fucking what, because that is what this realm, those are the laws of this realm. That's the price of being here. That's it. Indeed. You will never change that.
Yeah, and sometimes I get worried about doing these more large societal level kind of conversations. I get worried my sort of rebellious nature will come out and I might get myself into trouble with my words. But like I did a conversation with Sam Tripoli recently, and I opened it up with basically fuck the government. And I know it can sound like very anarchist-ish, and I don't know if this is the sort of contention is like up your alley or not particularly, but what I meant by that is to get people to more kind of look at things more deeply in terms of like etymologically and in the sense of, you know, government, like governmente, like controlled mind, and think about the institutions and bodies or organizations that we allow to usurp and take hold of the direction of our minds and our souls and the power that we grant them. But to be clear, I want to be clear that I do believe in a sort of hierarchy, a hierarchy of distributed responsibility and place of governance or government, or, you know, like, because it's almost like a corrosive or coercive control node in some sense. But this sort of hierarchy of distributed responsibility that I'm speaking of, it has to be structured properly, and we can get into that. But I think that there are a couple of probability tunnels, so to speak, that we could go down depending on the collective masses' mental health and our integrity as a whole.
That's kind of the thing. That entire idea, while a worthy one and a noble one, is predicated on the belief that everyone will be equally as virtuous and as moral as the next person, and at a minimum level, as virtuous and as moral as they need to be in order for the society to function. And that is where the whole theory kind of falls apart. But to circle back around to, like, you asked me what was I hoping to do with this podcast, and my sincere hope is to address the positive and the negative of these exactly what we're talking about, these potential societal structures, these hierarchies, and address the elephant in the room, right? Perhaps for the first time in our modern civilization, since, like, you know, the classical liberal arts education, when they were actually studying Plato, like reading the dialogues and conversing about it and stuff like that, instead of just like, okay, go read the symposium, write 4 paragraphs and let's move on. To talk about self-sovereignty, that is ultimately what is required before. It's prerequisite to everything you're talking about. But we don't get to choose when and how other people undergo that difficult, perhaps alchemical process of solve et coagula into the more rectified, more perfect version of themselves. They're going to do that whenever they see fit. And I mean, you know, I do believe that higher forces are at work to sort of like force the hand. But, you know, that's ultimately the main message that I have for this podcast, is that we need to stop talking about what the ideal exterior situation is, and we need to very, very minutely, carefully, and persistently address what the necessary interior situation is. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll go negative for a minute, and I think it'll be particularly fun to paint a picture of what in my mind I don't rule out a very real potential, a sort of reality tunnel, you know, that can kind of illustrate this sort of negative path, like one reality, the dark reality potential. If you allow me to kind of go a little dystopian rant for a minute, I'll paint a picture in a scenario, and we could play around with maybe how to avoid that trajectory, hopefully. So I could see a potential path where the power structures at play continually amplify and ramp up these strong inclinations towards essentially breeding dependence versus independence. Like at this rate, thinking about the trajectory of things, potentially becoming so disconnected from the will of the people, where instead of being called citizens, the dominant heads of resources and resource distribution and legal legislation eventually just figure out a way to eliminate that word citizen altogether, along with the word freedom. Like they'll eliminate citizen and just replace it with dependent, and that'll be like the new normal. Right now we all argue about all of these gender pronouns because there's, you know, too many, but they'll just eventually eliminate all of them: male, female, they, them, all of it, and it'll just say on everybody's mandatory ID card dependent with a capital D, and you know, I'll have like some kind of unique code number, like I'm dependent AZ1R22, and that's my government issued name. And you know, my parents, they went to jail for trying to name me. I guess there used to be this thing back in the day where biological parents could decide what their children's names were, but we don't really talk about that stuff anymore because spelling is a satanic act of black magic and la la la. So, you know, you'll go to the mall and walk around. You'll walk through security scanner stations that will alert the security guards if you're in good standing or not, and if your social credit scores drop down to a certain spot, and if you've maybe accumulated enough digital demerits, then I don't know, maybe you due to your non-conformist behaviors being reported, then you'll lose your quote-unquote privileges. Maybe you'll get caught carrying something crazy, like, I don't know, physical cash or some shit like that. And, you know, the whole time your buddy that you're with, he'll be like freaking out and he'll be like, bro, what the fuck were you thinking carrying cash into the mall? Are you out of your mind? And yeah, you'll just be like temporarily deactivated. You'll be decreased to the level of a defective dependent. That's what they'll call you on the news. You'll be placed in a category of defective dependence and then maybe sent to a mandatory reformation facility on Saturdays or something like that. And then people will be like embarrassed to hang out with you in public because, you know, you won't be able to buy or sell anything. You'll have this like blinking red light around you, like some digital status belt that, you know, people will see with their augmented reality Google contacts. People will be whispering and pointing at you.
Wow, you've thought about this, man. This is like, this reminded me of like the movie Brazil or something. This
exactly.
Is cool.
Yeah, I'd be like receiving notifications on their phones, like a Bluetooth alert that, you know, you're now coming in contact with a defective dependent. It's within your proximity and steer clear. And it just, you know, they'll be full of fear and wondering what did that guy do to get deactivated. It'll be like whispering, like, yeah, I heard if, you know, you can go straight to deactivation now if you don't get the vaccines. I wonder, like, maybe did he get the vaccine? Maybe he's dangerous. Maybe he's contaminated. So I don't know. Anyway, that's a real possibility. So, you know, mind control is interesting. Yeah, what are your thoughts on all that? And
well, we're kind of already there, man. This is the issue, right? The exterior accoutrements of our situations are always going to resemble things that happened before as they decay and as they heal and build up, because those are the two forces in the universe. You know, Chesed and Gevurah for the Kabbalists out there, the building up and the breaking down. Okay, anabolism and catabolism. Those are principles in our biology. It's just everywhere. So it's in some years it's going to look like, you know, whatever, the reign of Ashurbanipal, and in other years it's going to look like, you know, Marcus Aurelius, and then other years it's going to look like 9/11, and then other years it's going to look like the vaccine. It's just it's the same thing, but we're obsessed with what it looks like without addressing the fact that, like, oh, this is the principle of deconstruction. Whereas people who can look at that stuff for what it is, well, now their perspective, as I was saying in the beginning, they have a broader perspective, which means rather than seeing the corner of the chessboard, they see the whole fucking chessboard. And that means that they can utilize these things against us. So, for instance, you have this whole thing, right? In the, the 1960s, 70s, 80s, that whole theosophical New Age movement, they were talking about this new generation of people that were going to come, and they were going to fix everything. And they have indigo auras, and that makes them natural healers, and we're the indigo children, and all this stuff. And I'll be honest with you, man, like, I absolutely 100%, I couldn't my whole life, but almost spontaneously with some encouragement and training, I can see auras. I can see the energy field around a human being. I can feel it. And I'm not fucking special. Anyone can do it. Okay. It's just you got to bring your attention there. And there's some truth to this idea of this particular auric color that surrounds a healer. I worked in massage therapy and physical therapy, and went to school for acupuncture. I was around a lot of people. I trained extensively in qigong therapy and Reiki hands-on healing, and there's definitely an exchange of that kind of color, really, that energy that's moving, right? Because all it is vibration. That's all colors are. That's all this energy is. It's just vibration. I happen to have particular sensory organisms that can pick up on that information and feed it to my brain. Okay, and then my brain works it out. So there's definitely something to that. And look, we have this generation of people that, yeah, absolutely, we were getting tired. Very tired of the way things were, but we only saw the immediate picture. We only saw the sandbox we were playing in, whereas the powers that be, and don't, people laugh because they're like, oh, some unspecified they. Yeah, because I don't know their fucking names, right? Because they're not the people you're gonna see on TV. Okay, it's not the politicians. Okay, that's not who does those are the dirty work people. Okay, you're not going to hear about these fucking families. It's not the Rothschilds, right? It's not pronounced Rothschild. It's Rothschild. It means red shield in German. It's not them. Those are the power players, yes, but they're not the ones making the decisions. They're the ones that have to hold the power, that have to look like they are the movers and shakers. So yes, an unspecified they. The powers that be see the whole chessboard. They see the entirety of the sandbox, the entirety of the playground, because they fucking put us here. With some, subconscious willingness on our own part. That's the only way this could have worked. You get this group of people that wants change, and look at what they're able to do with that sentiment. They're able to weaponize that sentiment, not only against the prevailing paradigm, but against our friends, against our families, against our each other, our peers, everything. And people scratch their heads, and it's like, well, they're pointing outside. Well, we got to fix this, and we got to fix that. Plug the hole in the boat. None of this shit at this point matters, right? Because now the way out is the way through. It's not getting any better, okay? It's going to get drastically worse before it gets better. I promise you that. But what the future depends on, whether or not we're able, you as an individual, me, whoever's watching or listening to this as individuals, what is going to decide our fate, let's put it, poetically, is the amount of freedom we are able to attain within ourselves, and what that has to do with, right? Because that's all this has ever been about. That's all this has ever been about, incarnation into materiality. Plato has been talking about it for 2,500 years, and he got it from the Pythagorean school, and they got it from the Egyptians and the Chaldeans. It's the central theme. This is what I've been trying to explicate. with my entire body of work so far, little by little, because you need the foundations. You need it to unfold. I cannot vomit it out onto you. That's the whole purpose of an initiatic system, a mystery school. It has to be a slow drip. I want to initiate whoever is willing to listen to me. Okay, that's what my channel is there for. That's what my work is there for. It's a species of initiation. Okay, but it has to be slow, controlled. You have to, not because of the nature of the information, but because of the nature of us. Like, we are these fragile little fucked eggshells that are just, you know, we're so conditioned to like these tiny, tiny micro environments now that we live in. You know, these little micro bubbles that I can't just come along and burst it. That's impossible, because you're armed at every gate now. The smaller your world gets, the more on the defense you constantly are. Okay, that's what an animal is, you know. So what we have to reorient our perspectives towards is rectification of the interior, and through these impulses that this new generation came into incarnation with, came into this, you know, the field of battle, quote unquote, of materiality. We came in with these idealistic, you know, renovating tendencies. But what's happening is we can no longer connect with the truth of the situation. And so the torch we brought here to bring light is now just fucking burning everything down, because the let's say the players on the exterior of the battlefield, right? The players of the game, if we're on the board, people moving the pieces, they can see the whole picture and we cannot. And the main thing that continues to elude us, that we need to understand before we are able to gain any ground, is that I have to go inward. And this vicious ray of penetrating criticism that everything I look at just kind of fucking smolders with my disdain. I have to, in a way, turn that inward on myself. Because that becomes light in interior darkness. And I have to, right? When you go into any kind of energy healing, or I don't know how much anymore, you know, Western allopathic medicine, but typically, you know, in the older traditions, the first maxim of becoming a healer is, physician, heal thyself. That's what you have to do first before you can do anything else. And actually, it's fucking the only thing you can do, right? Because then the next tenet is, when a person comes to you and says, help me, I don't feel well, I'm ill, before you do anything, you prescribe medicine, you just look the person in the eyes and you ask them, are you willing to stop doing what is making you sick? I can't force you to do anything, you know. And that's the whole thing. We have big fucking problems with self-sovereignty because we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater with morality and ethics and virtue. And now, you know, we come in with this, you know, again, this younger generation, we're coming in with this inclination towards mystical knowledge, perhaps as an impetus of previous lives, who knows, really. And now they're spoon feeding us dog shit. We're getting Crowley, we're getting Thelema, we're getting Anton LaVey as wisdom. That's not wisdom. That is not wisdom. Okay, I mean, like, you probably think it is, and kind of like, you know, probably in a state of arrested development within a countercultural milieu because you haven't healed the things that made you run away from the paradigms you grew up with. But at the end of the day, it ain't fucking right. It's not wisdom. That's not what the occult is. That is an inversion, a perversion of the occult that says, I have power. I have power. No, you need power over yourself. You don't need power over anything else. You don't go start, you know, doing sorcery and money magic and elemental magic. It's like a baby trying to, like, making a fucking mess of an already bad situation. You're adding more karma, you know? So it's like trying to clean the house with greasy fingers. You're fucking everything up. Clean your fingers, you know, purify yourself. That's the main work. There is no other work.
Wow, indeed. Okay, so I've got a couple questions. I want to ask you, I guess the one thing is when you speak of like the powers that be, quote unquote, is it your estimation that these powers that be, because we mentioned like it's obviously it's not these political figures, and maybe it's not even some of these families. There's probably families behind families, or I don't know. I'm wondering, in your conception, are the powers that be human? Are they
No,
acting through humans or humanity and on a higher level? And maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
I think so. This is another reason why Gnosticism has been so important. Um, I think there are everything, I'll put it this way, everything in the material universe is an expression of consciousness one way or another. Is everything as sophisticated, quote unquote, as self-aware consciousness? Not necessarily. But does that mean that it's not conscious? No, not at all. Joseph Campbell had a beautiful line in the I think it was The Meaning of Myth, or it was the last interview he did at the end of his life with Bill Moyers on Skywalker Ranch. And he said he and his wife had a plant that was, heliotropic, and every morning would turn to face the sun to photosynthesize. And he said, you can't tell me that the thing's not conscious. There's an awareness, there's an acknowledgement. And the issue is that our minds are stuck in this idea that consciousness is, neurological function. That's not the case. That's a very sophisticated form, a very convoluted form of consciousness. That is self-aware consciousness, but that's not what consciousness is, on the broadest possible level. And these are not, I'm not trying to reinvent scientific terms. I'm going back to the original fucking ideas, of, the one, the intellect, the soul, the three hypostases, these terms, the psyche cosmo, the anima mundi, the world soul, natura naturans, natura naturata. These are old ideas, pre-modern, pre-postmodern. So, some people want to abandon all that stuff. And to me, it's like, it's a kind of suicide as a species, and it inhibits your growth. It like I was saying, it inhibits your ability to expand your consciousness. So of course, yes, the societal paradigms within which we find ourselves kind of encamped or trapped in are going to reinforce this idea of like, let all that shit go. I mean, basically what we're talking about here is Plato's cave. And I hate it because it's such a cliche now. But that's exactly what it is. We're talking about Plato's cave. He wasn't talking about a physical place. He's talking about a state of being. And those entities which kept the human beings enslaved are a kind of, I guess, what you would call an archonic force. Archontes meaning the rulers. In some Neoplatonic conceptions, they're called cosmocrators. They're referred to as the hebdomad. It's essentially the 7 planetary forces and their corresponding intelligences. And here, you get into, it's like I've got to take you to college here in esoteric verbiage to understand what I'm talking about. I don't think the physical planets are doing this to us. In a sense, right? I do believe that there's an astrological impact, but there are certain principles inherent to the foundations, maintenance, and the quality of manifestation of the universe. And those principles are comprised of both light and dark. And the light principles assist. However, they do so gently. And sometimes their assistance doesn't look very friendly. But ultimately it is a blessing. And then there are dark forces. There are dark forces, and I'm not talking about things poetically. I'm talking about things abstractly. These are consciousnesses. They are intelligences that are, I don't want to say disembodied, because they're linked to particular things that exist here in physicality, but they're not exclusive to them. Everything that exists in this realm is merely a special example of this essential dark force, for lack of a better term, completely. I'm trying to meet any potential audience on common ground here. Not everybody's going to know about the archons and stuff like that. But and ultimately it is these intelligences, I believe that everyone that is self-interested and disinterested, apathetic to the plight of other people and to the higher realities. I think every person in the world that is that way ultimately serves those dark forces, those dark archonic forces. Do I think that it's completely dual on all levels? Absolutely not. I know on the other side of the veil, so to speak, it's all one. How far on the other side of the veil is a different story. I don't know, or I don't remember. But the thing is, there's obviously some ultimate thing that has to culminate here, and I am too small a cog and too vast a machine for my limited, perception as I am right now this minute, to be able to say with any certainty that I know what that end goal is. But I do know that this is Malkuta Vasaya. This is the world of action, the realm of making. And, there is a consequence and a beneficence to the soul in having to crawl its way out of the mire of materiality. My hope, my guess is that it will never want to do this again.